Welcome. We are live here in San Antonio at the San Antonio Botanical Gardens. The topic for today is unusual partnerships and unexpected innovations. My name is Asel. I'm with Asel Associates. And today our panelists are Andreas Seiter, Global Lead for Private Sector and Health, the World Bank Health Team. We have Sal Webber, President of Community Labs, Jim Reed, President, San Antonio Medical Foundation, Paul Rutter, who we have coming up on the screen here virtually from London. He's the Medical Director of ApiLabs, and Bill Phillips, Executive Vice President, Chief Information Officer, University Health Systems. So the format today, we're going to have each of our speakers have an 8 to 10 minute discussion, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A for everyone. So Andreas, if you would like to take the lead here and start out and tell us a little bit about what you do and the unusual partnerships and unexpected innovations you experienced.
Okay, thank you. And we'll see whether I can get my microphone to work. Is it working? No, it's working. Okay. Thank you. So, yeah, very happy to be here. It's my second time in San Antonio, but the first time really where I actually stay overnight in San Antonio. And it's already impressive the way that it started out. If you were in the panel in the morning, you heard a lot about partnerships already. So I'm kind of built on that a little bit. And my role, as you heard, is about the private sector in health, but I work for a multilateral institution, which is living off public money, although we are under global governance. So my job is kind of, on the one side, helping our teams that are implementing health system strengthening in countries. We are a financer, and we're giving money to governments so that the governments can improve the health systems in their country. That's roughly what we do. We are also using money that we get from DFID, Norwegian government, Japanese government, and so on, through trust funds to support the work that we are doing through grants. Otherwise, it's loans, as we are a bank. So in health, we work with governments. Often governments forget that there's a private sector. And in some countries, the private sector is by far dominant in terms of the service delivery and also in terms of the money being spent in health. And if it's not integrated, if there's no common purpose in terms of supporting public health, that's not good. That's not what we want. So that's one line of work. And the other line of work is the private sector coming to us, wanting to work with the World Bank. And some of that, what was mentioned this morning about the social capital. There are companies that are actually interested in doing something about better health systems. They come to us and they partially finance us. So I'm the entry point for these companies as well. So it's all about partnerships. During COVID pandemic, I've seen partnerships that work and partnerships that don't work. And I want to say a little bit also about my criteria for assessing a partnership up front and say this is likely to work or not so much. I want to bring a few examples. Some of them you heard already this morning, but some things that I observed in my own job where I say, aha, that was really interesting. Countries like Philippines and India, they very systematically and heavily invested in partnering with their private sector in order to manage COVID. Not quite sure. I think both countries have somewhat a political history where their governments are heavily leaning on private capital, private investment, private sector, also in the health sector. So there was clearly already a framework of engagement there. And they did it systematically also with inclusion of legislation, because if suddenly I, as a government, go to a private hospital and say, I'm sending you my COVID patients now, and the hospital say, blah, 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 the lawyers come and this and this. I'm not sure that this is all right. So hospital is maybe one thing. Then I'm going to the mall, and to say to the mall operator, now your mall is empty because people are afraid to catch COVID. Now, can you help us set up testing and vaccination centers? No? And again, they say, yeah, we can, but am I violating any rules, any laws, any code? So these countries were very quick in making sure that they pass a law which creates the legal certainty for these players to actually do what to do, and also had financing mechanisms in place, which means they already, of course, had a history of purchasing from the private sector so that these things could actually be executed quickly. Other countries which hadn't done this in the past. They came to the World Bank and said, can you advise us? We need to buy beds, for intensive care beds, no? And we don't know how much to pay. We don't know how to structure that. We have never done that because we all put people only in government hospitals, no? And then, of course, you're running into problems. It's not working so well. Innovative partnerships, you heard about the digital health. One case I really like is in Pakistan. So in Pakistan is a place where women don't necessarily have the same rights that men have, no? Just seeing all the white men on the panel here. So, there is an organization, it's called Sehat Kahani, that was founded by a female doctor who, after getting married, still wanted to practice her profession, and found many other women doctors who had that same feeling that they should not just get married and have kids, they still want to continue to be doctors. So what they're doing now is, because their husbands require them to stay home, they work from home as physicians that are basically doing telemedicine, linked up with health centers in rural areas which cannot have a doctor because doctors don't want to live there, and basically have the technology built in so that the nurse in the health center can link up the patient with a woman doctor who sits in a city in her, private office, or some of them even outside the country. People like Pakistanis that expats to other countries. And that is very successful. They got like 2 different awards, one UN Innovation and one Rolex Award already. And in the pandemic, again, you have then some telemedicine infrastructure that you can already use that is there. And so they also partnered up with public-run network of primary care clinics that could not see patients in person anymore, at least for a period of time. So these kind of things is the good ones. On the other side, let me say a little bit about partnerships that didn't work, and I don't want to name any, but I was part also of discussions among big institutions that had very high goals in terms of improving the situation around COVID in developing countries. And they could not really come together. And it was, what was lacking was a clear institutional framework, funding for it, dedication, because everybody who was on these meetings had a day job and was kind of representing their organization, but without having the mandate from the organization and the funding to actually do something about it. And then we were just too far away. Because decisions happen, and we see this very nicely here in this group, and what I heard this morning happen in the community, and that's where the wisdom is about what actually works, what you need. So my conclusion has been that, it's 2 factors. One, and the colleague from AbbVie mentioned it this morning. Do you have actually a common purpose? And second, do you have, to your common purpose, also the means to implement a piece of it in your own? And the best partnerships that I've been part of is if you have that common purpose and everybody operates under their own operational rules with their own budgets. But they come together, they share not only the objective, they take each a slice of the work that has to be done to implement the objective, and then they do it within their own systems rather than under some kind of a neutral umbrella which has its own bureaucracy that you're not familiar with. And so these are things that I find make it likely that a partnership works. One last thing in terms of a warning, but also maybe something, if there's anyone from a business school as an idea for research, what I find is that the more partners you have in a partnership, the transaction costs go up exponentially, not linear. That's my personal gut feeling. Nobody has ever shown me proof for that, but I would just keep that in mind. And maybe it's for a business school, something you can actually research and write a paper about. So that was my piece.
Well, thank you, Andreas. And we're going to move on to Paul now, who is virtually on the screen. So go ahead and take it, Paul.
Great. Thank you so much. Great to join you. Sorry to not be there in person. I think my perspective on this comes as somebody who's spent most of my career to date working in big global health programs, delivered in partnerships between often many different organizations. So, for example, I was the Chief Operations Officer of the Global Polio Eradication Initiative for WHO, which is a partnership between the global health giants, really, WHO, UNICEF, the Gates Foundation, Gavi, Rotary, CDC, this big sort of $1 billion a year program. As I'll come on to, I've now moved to a very different organization, but let me first say something about innovation within these big global health partnerships, which I think is important because if you look at the dollars being spent on global health programming in low and middle income countries, a huge proportion of the investment is going into, when summed together, big partnerships between big organizations. Think Gavi, the Global Fund, and so on. These programs are great in many ways. You often really see the benefit of partnerships, to me, come when every organization has very distinct and individual strengths, and the partnership is able to play to those strengths. So the Global Polio Eradication Initiative is a great case in point for that. WHO has the power uniquely to convene the ministers of health of the world, and through the World Health Assembly, it was decided that the world will eradicate polio. UNICEF is on the ground in almost every country, has expertise in communication, and so is exceptionally well placed to mobilize hundreds of thousands of people to give and millions of people to receive polio vaccination. And then when the Gates Foundation came into the partnership, Bill and Melinda Gates brought not just their own funding, but the ability to call the president of basically any country, and the ability to mobilize funding from other philanthropists, and so forth across all of the partners. So every partner really adding something special and unique and playing to their own strengths. If you had the goal of eradicating polio in mind and were putting together a partnership, you couldn't do much better than that set of organizations to achieve it. But let's talk for a minute about innovation. And I say this not just thinking of polio, but thinking of the big global health programs in general. Partnerships like this really struggle to innovate. In part, that's obvious. If you look at any single big organization, they tend to be more bureaucratic. They're not known for their innovation. When you bring several of them together in partnership, to the point that Andreas just made, the effect is not a linear one, it's exponential. Bring together several bureaucracies, innovation does not tend to increase. But it's useful, I think, to be more specific about why that is. The first issue in the big global health programs is that they're primarily focused on operational delivery, which is hugely complex. And so a lot of the time and energy is taken up in trying to address the challenges of delivering very, very difficult goals across multiple countries. The second thing is that for one partner to try out something new often requires the support of other partners, either because that's baked into the governance structure or just informally, that to do something on the ground requires the other partners who are involved to agree to it. And that's a big problem because often the other organizations don't see the value of the idea. They may be threatened by it in some way. It may just not have been their idea. But I've really seen a lot of ideas dying young. And of course, when that happens, after a time, people stop coming up with new ideas. And then I think the third issue is once you have a big formal partnership like that set up, it's fairly fixed. It becomes more difficult to bring in new partners. So to my mind, there's a big issue here. A large proportion of the world's global health investment is happening through partnerships between these big organizations. Those have many, many strengths, but in general, innovation is not one of them. So I think 2 points to make on this. The first is unexpected challenges can still bring unexpected innovations. We've absolutely seen that through COVID. To go back to the polio example, the entire Global Polio Eradication Initiative pivoted practically overnight and was able to mobilize hundreds of thousands of its community health workers in support of the COVID response. It was a remarkable thing that only an organization of that kind of scale, only a few organizations have that kind of scale, and it made that big change. But my second point is, in global health, where the big organizations and the big programs are very dominant, the small, nimble organizations and partners are really key to driving innovation. So just to close, I mean, on a personal note, this interest in innovation was my motivation last year in making the shift away from big global health programs. I'm now working for a company called Apiject, which is a public benefit company on a mission to transform the way in which injectable medicines and vaccines are being packaged and delivered. Our technology essentially enables medicines and vaccines to be given in single-dose, pre-filled injectors manufactured at any scale. So it's an organization set up very specifically to try to transform something in the established practice firmly focused on global health. And I don't want to speak specifically about our company. We're looking at one area of global health, which to my mind is important, the delivery of medicines and vaccines. But I think my point is a more general one. With companies like this, with organizations designed in the right way, there is no such thing as an unusual partnership, because there's no usual partnership. They're able to be open to working with whoever they need to work to, and to span the public and private sectors in a way that's more difficult for many of the big established partners, to be able to span between geographies. And if you do that, if you design that in the right way, what we've seen by looking at many smaller organizations is that innovation is not and should not be unexpected, that you can design for it. So just to close, I think there is that very interesting role for those smaller, more flexible organizations. The big global health programs which dominate our field are great, but they really, really need to be paired with these other types of organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul, and a perfect segue to the local level with Sal.
Thank you. So Community Labs is a nonprofit that was started in July of 2020. And it was started with a hug between a father and a son. So Graham Weston was welcoming his son back from the UK, had a hug, and then spent the next 3 weeks in the hospital with COVID. His son was asymptomatic, never developed symptoms. And so those of you who know Graham, he's a very creative guy. He spent that whole time thinking, like, how can I fix this problem? This is how it's spreading. He knew in his gut exactly how it was spreading. So he decided to build a lab, and he got started on that mission, talked to all kinds of universities around the state, offered lots of money, came back with quotes that said 12 to 18 months, we'll have your lab. Well, 12 to 18 months, we didn't have 12 to 18 months in the summer of 2020. So Graham instead went locally. He's got his foundation, the 80/20 Foundation, the Kronkosky Foundation, and the Tobin Foundation. They had a lunch and said, hey, let's solve this here in San Antonio with San Antonio people, see how far we can go. Very shortly after that, they partnered with BBG, BioBridge Global, our local blood bank, which was kind of not the first thought when you're thinking about COVID, you know. Turns out they have incredibly deep scientific expertise around PCR testing and high volume testing. They already have a lab there that tests blood, 60 million tests a year. So they know high volume processes and they know how to install these things. And so that kicked off the project. That's where I got engaged with the project. And we launched that lab in 60 days. Now, we launched that lab, you know, in the beginning, 60 days, we could only do 400 a day. And so that first 400 a day that we were doing, we partnered with a local school district. So our mission at that point, we worked on our mission, what are we going to do with this lab? We decided we're going to keep San Antonio open. Well, how do you keep San Antonio open? Well, first you got to make sure that kids are in school, because a lot of our parents in San Antonio can't Zoom into work, right? And so if the schools were closed, then we've got a catastrophe, because all the parents have to be at home and nobody's working. The city just kind of shuts down. So keep San Antonio open. the causal link there was schools needed to be open. And at the point where we started in August of 2020, only about 25% of the kids were going to school in person. And so that was a terrible experience for both the kids and the parents and the teachers. And so we started testing with Somerset. And the innovation, we made a decision very early on. We didn't want to innovate around the science, right? We're not scientists. I'm not a scientist. So where we can innovate is around the service and the logistics behind things. And so what we did was a customer-driven, customer-back innovative process. We talked to the customer, who in this case was Dr. Hinojosa at Somerset, and we said, what do you need from this program? And he said, I need the kids out of class for no less than 15 minutes. I need the results before I go to bed so I can call parents and prevent the sick children from coming in and infecting other kids. And we said, all right. I did some quick math and I said, I think I can do that. And then we went back to the lab and said, they all said, Sal, why'd you agree to that? So that's where the innovation came from. So we came up with a process that started at 400 a day, and we could get it done in about 8 hours. But then as you scale, that goes past 24 hours. And the whole goal was to get that information back to the parents before 7 a.m. the next day, so they could prevent that child from infecting other children. Turns out that worked, and it started catching on. Next up, we presented to the Aspire network of school districts. And if those of you are familiar with Aspire here in San Antonio, it's a group of schools who have pulled together both resources, and they approach things in a very similar manner. And they all had parents who were, couldn't Zoom into work, and so they all needed to be increasing their attendance. And so over time, working with the Aspire networks, we were able to increase attendance from 30% in person to as high as 85% in person, back to normal. And so some of the school districts really excelled through COVID. In fact, Somerset has been given an award for one of the best school districts in the country, while a lot of other school districts who shut down, have had real struggles. And so as we grew our capabilities, we got to where we could eventually do, about 40,000 tests per week. We have an average turnaround time of about 9 hours. None of this, we didn't innovate anything in the science side of things. We just were very diligent about looking for every minute we could shave off. One of the things we did was just on the collection side. How do you go through a whole school full of kids in one period? That was kind of, we'd have to get through everybody in 1 hour. We developed a swabbing method that at the time was pretty innovative. It was just anterior nares, just the front of the nostrils. We did a sensitivity test in order to prove that, and it turned out that we could do that in 18 seconds. We knew very early on that there were no 5-year-old kids who wanted the brain tickler more than once, right? And so by the end of the program, we did, we're just wrapping up the program now. We had integrated ourselves into the weekly schedule of the schools to the point where the kids enjoyed it. They really did enjoy going to get a test, because it was like, oh, hey, the test people are here. I'm going to go swab my nose and, skip back to class. And so we really did focus on making sure that, we treated them like customers. This wasn't just like a military operation. We became a part of the fabric of the school day and the school week. And so that really did work for us. And so fast forward to Omicron, right? So that was the last emergency that we kind of dealt with. It kind of wrecked everything. From the PCR testing perspective, that I didn't mention, we do PCR testing. Because what we were doing to get these numbers, we do pooled testing 5 to 1, and that's how we can get through things so fast. Omicron, the positivity rate was 30 to 50% some days of everybody we tested, asymptomatics, symptomatics, everybody had it. And so that doesn't allow you to pool. So we had to go back to individual testing, which decreased our capacity, increased our cycle times. And so during that whole emergency as it was going on, I got a phone call from Bill Phillips here in San Antonio. And it was a 5-minute phone call. He said, hey, I heard you need an extra location to do collection on this side of town. Meet me at the Wonderland Mall in 15 minutes. And it was the first time I'd ever met Bill, right? So I said, okay, great. I hopped in the truck, drove over to Wonderland, and there I met Bill, and that's turned out to be just a fantastic partnership for us. It was one of our main locations to reach out to the public and do this testing. And so another piece of our partnerships was the way that we engaged with governments, so local governments. We were funded by the city, the county, the state, private businesses. The way that we did this is we were pretty innovative on our price. So our testing for PCR and delivery of results was $35, in general. And so most PCR testing facilities that were offering 24-hour results were charging $450. And if they weren't saying 24 hours, it might be up to a week, depending on how much volume's going through. And so I think that allowed the governments to trust what we were doing. The gold standard PCR tests that we were using allowed our customers to trust the veracity of the results. And then, what we also learned is if you think you have COVID, the second you take the test, you really want the result. That's not always possible to give it that second. But we took it as a mission to get that result back to that person as fast as possible. And it had to be the correct result. And so after having done that now over 2 million times, we feel like we've figured some things out along the way. So there you go.
Thank you, Sal. And we'll move on to Jim.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to share some information from the San Antonio Medical Foundation. The foundation was formed right after World War II in 1947 to solve two problems. One was to increase the number of beds, per capita hospital beds, because we were the lowest in the United States per capita. The other one was to bring a medical school to San Antonio. And so the Chamber of Commerce had a committee called the Committee to Bring the Medical School in Galveston to San Antonio, which never happened. But at that time, that was the only medical school, and there had been a hurricane down there. So we initially were a land foundation. We had land that we gave to the Health Science Center and to other entities. So far, we have provided about 400 acres in the medical center, about half to the Health Science Center and the other half to different institutions and hospitals. We went along for, this is our 75th year, so we went along for about 55 years as nothing but a land foundation. And then we did ground leases, and some of our tenants went from faith-based not-for-profits to for-profit hospitals. And all of a sudden, we became cash flow. And then we developed a strategic plan, and that strategic plan started out saying, how are we going to use our other 200 acres? But quickly, as we interviewed people, they said, look, San Antonio has some unique features, and one of my trustees said, if you're unique, if you're unique, nobody else can have it. And so they said, well, okay, how is that? So, well, a lot of places have UTSA, the major university, and they have a medical school, but they don't have the resources you have, like Texas Biomed, Southwest Research, BioBridge Global, the largest military health care facility in the world. And while you're working together a little bit, if you could work together more, who knows what could happen? So then we said, we're not a bank. We don't need to keep putting this money in our coffers. Let's use our money for something. And so we developed a collaborative grant program. And we decided we're not going to be investors, we're going to be encouragers. And so with this program, which has now been in effect for 6 years, we have provided 22 grants, most of them around $200,000. It's startup money. It's money they can't get anywhere else, that maybe they can go to the NIH or somewhere else later to get increased funding. And so we've put $3.7 million into the program so far, and it's been very, very successful in getting people to talk with each other and come together. The other thing we did was a result of a question that came up of, well, what does San Antonio have in the way of research in biosciences and healthcare? So one summer we decided to blitz information on healthcare and bioscience research. And the net result, the bottom line of that, was that we developed a database and a website that's called sabioscience.org, which lists almost 3,000 healthcare and bioscience research projects being done in San Antonio, most of them collaborative, and have 14 institutions that participate in this and also provide an oversight task force to keep us guided and keep us moving in the right direction. So you can go up and search by disease, you can search by institution, you can search by, in fact, we hired the people that did the Tobin entertainment facility, because you can go up and search their organizations and see what you want. But you can search about any way you want to. It's used as a recruiting tool to a great extent for researchers that may feel like San Antonio doesn't have the base of research that we do. And it's used for researchers to find other researchers who are doing work in their field. So anyway, I'll be glad to answer any questions, but that's what we do at the San Antonio Medical Foundation.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. And on to you, Bill.
All right. Thank you. Am I on? Come on. All right. There we go. Thank you. And in the theme of partnerships, University Health, we knew that as COVID was coming, we had to step up and do things for the community and for the patients and just the population of this city. And we did many things, and one of the things we did, we were the largest international study for remdesivir trials. We started, before Sal's group came, local community testing for healthcare workers. Backlog, we have our own labs, so backlog testing became an issue. We helped with local backlog, we helped with state backlog. But one of the most important things that we think that we really did that left our mark was we formed the first mass vaccine clinic. And when you look at what we did, we used Wonderland Mall. I was actually, so talk about the first partnership, it's the CIO and the CEO, right? Because I'm in the process of implementing a new electronic health record at the tune of $170 million in a pandemic. I rented space in the mall for training, but I can't train anybody because everyone was out with COVID and we can't get close. So we said, okay, let's make a vaccine clinic and you will run it. So it was very exciting for me. I still do have PTSD from some of those earlier days. But when we started, before we started the mall, we started with the first responders. And we partnered with the city. We were doing fire department, EMS, police, FBI, Border Patrol, state troopers, and the list goes on. And we would schedule those in advance. I had a point contact at every one of those organizations. But what we're proud of too that we did in that, we started doing school workers, teachers, school nurses in the first responder group. We felt like they were a frontline worker as well. So we had to have our infrastructure set up to do all this, because one of the important things that was, if you got your first shot, we had to make sure you were scheduled for your second shot, right? That's one of the most critical pieces. So we used our technology. We opened up Wonderland Mall. We immediately started booking online appointments, but we had to bridge that technology. So besides online appointments, we did targeted areas, we did phone banks, we used every technology that we could. And when we first got the vaccine, I think people parachuted in on us. Even though we had appointments, there were thousands of people that just ascended upon the mall, begging for leftovers at night. People flew in, took our appointments offline, all over the country, actually all over the world. We had people flying in on private jets. We had people from every country in this world actually came to our mass vaccine site. And at our peak when we were doing this, we were doing 8,000 vaccines a day, and we partnered with so many different groups. So we continued the methodology of partnership. So we partnered with areas that we really felt needed help. So besides the group of the first responders, guess what? VIA reached out to us. Hey, we got bus drivers on the front line. Can you help us? Come on. Grocery workers, right? The Grocery Chain Association, restaurant workers, other healthcare entities we partnered with to help them if they couldn't get vaccine to vaccinate their employees. Smaller healthcare, like Center for Healthcare Services, all these other ones that are helping the public, we partnered and we were vaccinating them. So it was just an unreal experience, partnership with so many different entities. We also did pop-ups. We partnered with churches. We would go to churches. We had folks call us with bedridden people. So before San Antonio started doing that, we were going out to people's houses. We partnered with Alamo colleges. We looked at studies, okay, what areas in town weren't getting vaccines? Okay, East Side, right? Weren't getting vaccines. We opened up a vaccine clinic for over 6 weeks at St. Phillips College. We did pop-ups at St. Mary's College. So we partnered with, I think about everybody in San Antonio, if I'm not mistaken, to deliver these vaccines. It was a pleasure doing it. And when it was all done and said, we administered well over 500,000 vaccines at Wonderland Mall. We started in the lower level when drug first became available, and we quickly opened up next door, which was a mobility center, because the elderly was the first target, right? And they were coming in on walkers and wheelchairs. So wow, we started, okay, we have to have a mobility. We can't move them. We did them in the car. And then we expanded so much, we opened up an upstairs level of the mall. And another partnership was with Wonderland Mall. Hey guys, I need to expand, I need space. But Bill, you can have it. Do whatever you need, we're here for you. And so we expanded upstairs. And so we kept this revolving cycle, and what we did a little bit different, we always had a first dose going on. Because we had upstairs and downstairs, we made sure, because the scheduling, it was very complex. I gotta bring you back in X amount of days. So we never wanted to stop first dose. So if downstairs we're shooting first dose, upstairs we're shooting second. If upstairs we're shooting first, downstairs we're shooting second. So we kept that revolving door going. So when we're all done and said, lots of partnerships and over 500,000 vaccines just out of the mall alone.
Thank you, Bill. And I was at Wonderland Malls and got my vaccine there, so it was fantastic
Awesome.
work.
All right, show of hands, how many did?
Yeah, exactly.
There we go.
So we're going to move on to a question and answer session. We do have quite a few people in the audience, and there are people viewing virtually. So we have questions coming in through the system, which I'll receive via text message, but I also like to open it up to the individuals that are in attendance live here. So pardon me while I look at the phone here. We don't have any yet, so if anyone in the audience has any questions.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. Question for really each of you. What's next? So you experienced a bunch of innovation. Obviously, as Paul, you're doing what's next for you. What's next for each of your organizations? And do you just take this experience and say, that's great, and go back to what you were doing? Or what's next?
Well, I'll jump on that. We took our technology. So we came up with technology, like I said, to make sure appointments were done, registrations were done. So we took that same technology, and we do mass flu drives in San Antonio every year. Before it was on paper. And we would also have to get that paper and information to the state immunizations. So we took our same technology, and our last flu drive that we did, we do several in town, many thousands of people. We did it all electronic. You pulled up in your car. We had iPads out. We used that technology. We put the appointment. We opened them up on a MyChart so they could get their records. Automatic link to the state. We just are in the process of a state bilateral or bidirectional interface. So we're continuing to utilize the technology that we spawned during that time. Of course, telehealth is expanding for us. So many of the technologies that we had to stand up immediately, now that's part of our daily business and our go-forward strategy.
What's next for everyone else?
Well, I'll just comment. Our first year, was 6 years ago, and we funded about $300,000 of research grants. And last year it was $1.2 million. So we see that growing and growing and growing, because these are state-of-the-art, cutting research projects. And one of them was a whole blood project which came about in a very short period of time. And interestingly enough, if you use whole blood and you lose 3 of your liters of blood and you don't have whole blood, your chances of getting to a hospital is less than 15%. If you get whole blood, it's approaching 90% that you'll live. So some of these research projects have very short feedback and benefit.
Whole blood, like whole milk? What's whole blood?
Whole blood, well, you know, if you think back to the blood bank and you gave blood, your blood got circulated or separated. And it was more efficient to have the different pieces of the blood. And so it took the blood bank taking whole blood and keeping it whole. It took the keeping it cool. It had to get into helicopters. It had a lifetime that had to come back to the hospital if it was reaching its lifetime. And so it was a very complex operation, a lot of people involved.
Yeah, for community labs, we're trying to figure out what we're going to do next. You know, I think we've got this base capability built. You know, we know how to flex up an organization to 300 plus people and cover all of South Texas. That's a pretty neat capability. You know, we're bringing COVID testing to an end. You know, at the end of April, so. We're actively asking that question. Maybe we can have a meeting. You could tell me what I can go do next. I think, Jim, we're going to talk after this because we're trying to talk to all the smart people in San Antonio. We know that we want to stay nonprofit. We know that we want to have a public health impact. We did that through molecular testing for 2 years, but we could kind of do anything. You know, we're not scientists. But we know scientists, and we know how to work with scientists, and we know how to scale things. And so we have that base capability that we'd love to leverage to continue doing good things for San Antonio.
Paul, we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, thank you. No, I think what's next for us at ApiJect and for me in this new phase is really building from what became very, very clear in the pandemic, that there are huge structural problems in the lower middle income countries of the world. And so we really want to work hard to play our part in making sure that injectable medicines and vaccines can reach all people. You know, there are 10 million children every year who don't get even a single dose of vaccine. And huge challenges like this. So we're really, as I said, now set up to be able to span public and private and to be able to span from the US base into lower middle income countries, and thinking that the pandemic has laid bare many of the challenges, has provided a spark in terms of innovation and a flexibility in terms of how people partner.
Okay, so let me try from the World Bank's perspective. As I speak now for the institution. The institution has just gotten the mandate from the G20 Ministers of Finance, I think, to set up like a pandemic preparedness fund, which, when you remember our keynote speaker, Dr. Monroe this morning, said how important it is that you actually have money available quickly. So that, for a global scale, mandate is there to set it up. Now, of course, the countries need to pledge and put money in, and a governance structure has to set up and a new bureaucracy created. By that time, it's ready. I'll be out of the World Bank. So I retire in end of July. I'm hitting the age limit. So my personal what's next, in a sense, is an entirely different question. But professionally, I would think and that's why I liked so much being here. What I have seen also in other examples in my work is the true interesting innovation, the part that we cannot do at global level with all our smartness and our degrees. It comes from the community, because you know the social compact is not only about trust. The trust builds up when you go through something together. Yeah? When you have to rely on another person in a situation which is other than just friendly small talk. That's how you build trust. But there's another thing, which is confidence. It's like, if I'm operating within a legal framework and I know the law is enforced, I have confidence that you actually follow through on the contract, because you have sanctions if not. And I think that's a bit of a shaky thing today we see in the global society. Yeah? So let's hope that it swings to the better. But I think there's also confidence from living in the same community, speaking the same language, the same dialect, and having the same understanding, the same cultural norms which are implicit. They're not necessarily written down somewhere. And then you understand what needs to be done, how you can translate the global solution into something that works locally. Or on the other end, when I'm, again, thinking for the World Bank and for others, you mentioned the big health organizations are not super big innovators. We should get better at picking up the innovation that is out there and helping it to get to scale. So that was a little bit also what I enjoyed in what I'm enjoying in my job, that you meet sometimes these, like these Sehat Kahani ladies and so on, and you can help them, can expose them to decision makers higher up who have more resources and so on, and can give them the platform that they need and take some of the innovation and bring it to a larger scale. So that's what I personally remain interested in professionally.
Well, for me, one of the most impressive things was the speed and mobility that y'all succeeded in. So I have a question of, how do we bring more entrepreneurs into the global health space, linking them with the resources and funding to enable them to succeed either locally or globally? Are there any organizations that are doing this currently that we can further support, or any ideas you have to bring that to the forefront?
I can continue talking. That's
it's a free-for-all. Yeah, okay. We don't have to go down the line, and it's an open discussion.
So yes, there is. I mean, there's actually within the World Bank is a private sector organization, IFC, that has a little line of venture capital is looking at it. But I think more in terms of size and so on, organizations such as Gates Foundation and others, there is definitely funder money out there for innovators and private health innovators. There's so many. I mean, for me, I'm a doctor by training, so I can see the market failure in the health sector, because as the patient, as the actual customer, you don't really know what's going on in your body, and you're scared, and people can sell you snake oil, and it happens all the time. And we heard, I mean, the US system is overly money-oriented, so people get more than is good for them. In other countries, they get just the wrong thing. Yeah, they run to the healer and don't, because the medical system is not delivering even the basics. No? But there are like certain core areas, such, for example, supply chain in low-income countries. African continent is largely sub-Saharan Africa. Drug supply is just horrible, and the money that's being spent on medicines often goes to the wrong stuff, or is being stolen. The drugs are being stolen, they're paid for, and then the truck is diverted somewhere to a private market. So this all can be improved when you bring in private entrepreneurs that are getting paid for actually delivering good quality medicines to the patient or to the health facility. And these things are happening. Yeah? So there is actually hope, there is private investment in it. So I've seen improvements the 18 years I'm with the World Bank now. It's picking up slowly. Some of these innovators are coming to scale. The problem that maybe if you think of something you can address, I think what the Phyllis point, the UBS lady who was on the panel this morning, that's an important one, and I wanted to ask, what prevents us from doing this quickly? Yeah? Can we make health impact as something you can actually pay for as an investor? I think that's the key, and I wonder what's the next step in doing that. I have some ideas, have to get in touch with her.
Yeah, I've got, I think, a unique perspective because I don't have a medical background. And I've spent 2 years in the middle of, talking to people about medical stuff that they care a lot about. I think, prior to this, I had my own consulting company. We solved problems for companies in the tech industry and manufacturing. And what I've noticed as an entrepreneur kind of coming into the healthcare system, talking to doctors and PhDs, with zero ego. You know, I don't know anything about what they're telling me. And I'm amazed at how many opportunities come from these conversations. But because the healthcare system, you know, there's rules. I think entrepreneurs can have a unique perspective and say, hey, that's a problem that can be solved if we do this. And I think a lot of people who are in the healthcare system are so caught up in the process and in the rules and how it's been done. I would encourage other entrepreneurs to have conversations with medical professionals and PhDs, because it's like limitless opportunities, I think, to improve things. And I think that can be an incredible collaboration.
But every inefficiency is somebody's income.
That's true. That's true. So I don't know if y'all heard that, but that is absolutely true. When you talk about eliminating waste from the healthcare system, you're talking about somebody's job. And so they tend to get a little defensive about that. You know, one of the first things we did at Community Labs is we said no appointments, walk up only. And I had like 5 doctors tell me, you're going to get overrun. It's going to be like, you know, Custer's Last Stand. You know, everybody's going to come at you and be mad at you. And no, what it made us do is size our capacity to meet the city level demand. And so that was the problem we're trying to solve. We're trying to solve a city level problem, and appointments were just getting in the way. And so we just got rid of the appointments, and then we figured out, you know, hey, 1,000 people a day are going to show up. And so you just got to be ready for 1,000. And so those kinds of approaches, you know, if you don't know better, you can solve problems without putting limits on it.
Well, I think the question centers around entrepreneurs and how to encourage more and what resources are available. And I see Larry in the back, so I'm going to brag on him a little bit. Just pre-COVID, we had 4 presidents that got together for the first time and formed a coalition from UTSA, Health Science Center, Texas Biomed, and SWRI, Southwest Research. And interestingly enough, they like each other, and they get along, and they and their spouses socially get along. But more important on this side, they put some money into a new initiative and work together to get the young entrepreneurs involved. And that's a first for San Antonio. And just compliment all of them on doing that.
And I would say, I think San Antonio, unique platform, right? 7th largest city in the country, but I think this is the smallest town in the country too. I think everybody knows somebody. I mean, and look at the willingness to partnership. You've heard all of us talk about partnerships. Sal, myself, I never met the guy, and you know, boom, yeah, I'll give you space, no charge, you know, come on over, right? So there's a lot of that, but also as we look in the medical sector, what's the next big thing that we really need to innovate around, right? One of the big things that's taking off in the medical sector is AI, artificial intelligence. So we should be targeting people that want to really take artificial intelligence to the next level in healthcare. Same thing with 3D printing. You might say 3D printing in healthcare. Think about it. You can print prosthetics, right? So these technologies are taking off around the world. I think in San Antonio, we need to focus on these, bring it to the attention of innovators, and really market what is happening and how it can revolutionize healthcare.
Love to hear from Paul.
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, if I can just add, I think it's also not just about bringing in more innovators and more entrepreneurs, but helping the existing innovators and entrepreneurs to also set their sights on low and middle income countries. You know, I'm often struck, particularly in the technology space, the difference that some of the technologies that have been commonplace now for years in the richer parts of the world, the difference that they could make in the poorer parts of the world. They're not high cost in general to implement, but they're not finding their way there. And I think it's in part because those markets are not always immediately attractive to companies that are based in the global north and in the west, but they can be. And I think it's also because it's a very different world. And so there's a real need for bridging. And I don't think that that's the job of any one organization or any individual. I think, you know, we're all a network and we can all help with that in some way, making connections between these very, very different parts of the world. To me, that's an important part of it as well.
So, you know, there's only so much capacity for these individuals up here. What advice can you give to others of your successes and failures at times to other regions, areas, to help them move forward?
One piece that jumps to mind is just the team. I think my biggest learning in putting together the Community Labs team, we had a lot of, I'll just call them low experience, high energy, high intelligence people. And so if I was going to go like post all of these jobs and look for resumes of the most experienced people and were they qualified to address something like COVID, I don't think we would have done anything. And so what this taught me, and coming from a corporate background, there is like a big resume process and you're looking for things. I think what this forced us to do was put people in situations where they maybe weren't qualified when they started, but they got qualified really quickly. And I think that's something that holds entrepreneurs back, building that team where they can translate the mission, translate the passion to. That's the most important part of doing something new, is that connection, that trust that gets built over time.
And I'll echo on that. So when I started that vaccine clinic and setting it up, I'm the IT guy, right? That's what the CIO is. And all of a sudden, I have a group of pharmacists reporting to me. And how are they going to fill my needs so we can get the vaccine in the arms? A group of nurses, a group of shooters, registration clerks. So all of a sudden, they had to come out of their normal cycle and their normal reporting structure and now reporting to me. And we lived there sometimes 18 hours a day. But that team and those partnerships really came together. And the thing that I think we all saw immediately in the first presentation I ever gave about the vaccine clinic, I opened it up with a little heart, and I can't do it holding the microphone, with the word compassion in there. And I think you have to have, for success, for future, sometimes we get away from patient-centered, and we really need to keep compassion in our brain of everyone that we're dealing with, because then the work effort comes from the heart, and you don't hear, I'm working too long, I don't want to do this. No, because you start with a compassion, mission-driven values pretty much in your head. And so I think that really goes a long way when you ask people to go to the next level.
We have some questions from the audience here.
If I may.
Fabulous round table here. I love it. I'm going to talk about perspectives and bureaucracy. So perspectives. So entrepreneurs have a certain perspective. They have a certain goal in investment. Academics, and I spent 30 years in universities before going in the nonprofit world, have a different perspective with regard to the output of their discovery. There's often a division there with regard to, and I mentioned the word earlier, it's on my mind a lot, trust. One of the things that excites me the most about this platform that we're only in our second year of is we must put people together with different perspectives to first educate each other. We talk a lot about educating the public, but we have to educate each other from the perspectives we bring. It's not everybody, investors want to rip you off, your science, intellectual property. These are issues that can be quite destructive in terms of building what we want. Bureaucracy is another problem. If you have layers of bureaucracy, you don't get things done. Organizations that get too big build more, leadership. One of the things about Texas Biomed that I abhor as a CEO is that if I smell bureaucracy, we run the other way. There's not enough time in life to deal with that, to be honest with you. The secret sauce may be the younger scientists in the room or the younger people coming through the pandemic. And I wondered if you'd address that, because I do think the world is changing. And I think the advantage of what happened with COVID let particularly young people understand the value of these different perspectives and how that can help human health. It's not a question, but it's a reaction from some of these points that I've just brought up. Anybody have any thoughts about some of those? Thank you.
I'll just mention the younger investigators. For this year, for the first time, 25% of our applications for research grants are artificial intelligence. And it's coming from younger investigators. So that's a new trend that's growing.
We have a question over here. We'll get the microphone over.
Yeah, thank you all for your presentation. Yeah, I'm really glad you said your background is from the IT world. And there's something I noticed here. Paul said something about polio. Polio, the health world was reactive to polio. We lost a lot of lives before we got it. HIV, the health world was reactive before we got it. Even COVID, the health world was reactive before we got it. Now the question is, how do we change the culture of being proactive in research towards health problem? I think that's a big thing for us because we don't know what the next thing is going to be. So I think that's something we should be looking at, working towards. That's my question.
Yeah, I maybe just to add on to the problem. One of the things we've discussed about community labs is that having a molecular testing capability for the public for the next pandemic that's already lab in a box, if you will, ready to go, is one of the things that we want to do. We want to leave this capability here. If you're a country and you have a navy, it's not because you're at war every single day, but when you're at war and you need a boat, the boat needs to be built already. You can't just start building the boat when the emergency shows up. And so that's one of the things we're going to try to do is leave a capability in San Antonio that can be there if it's needed. So we don't have to build it from scratch. But that's not at a global level. That's just kind of, all it takes is like a closet. We need like 400 square feet. It's not that much space. It's not that much work to do it. You just have to have it in your mind.
And I think we're planning, as we look into the future and you plan, right, we all know about supply chain issues today, right? We know we got hit with that in COVID. There wasn't PPE, and then the next list, and there wasn't enough drug, and then there wasn't enough syringes. And now we're facing other issues of, okay, now we can't get MRI contrast, and you can't get certain lab test tubes. So I think to add on to that, the planning and the thoughts that have to be in the future is, as we face the next crisis, we need to shore up the infrastructure under it, because I don't think any of us know what that next crisis is, but we got to have some of those components available so when we do face it, we, to your point, we can get ahead of it sooner than later.
Yeah, and I would answer in the same way. And from our institutional perspective, it's about the health systems that need to be in place in good times so that you can rely on them in the bad times. And there's so much to do, as was mentioned. It's not only the supply chains. You don't have data systems in many countries. You don't have, the nurses are writing by hand on some charts, which, that doesn't really give you any, bird's eye perspective on what's going on in the system. And that can be resolved, as mentioned. So many things are already in place somewhere else, but not there where it's most needed, where the disease burden is highest. No? So I think that's kind of the focus, to invest into this kind of boring stuff that's already there, but is not boring for those that don't have it. No? The other thing also, I saw some contradictory information that some countries that have decent health systems, actually the COVID outcomes were not as good. So that comes this issue of, do I trust my leaders? And what the people tell me on TV, do I trust them or not? No? So that's an entirely different question. I'm not sure what we can do about that, no? Because that can undermine whatever you have then in actual technical infrastructure.
If I could maybe come in to follow on from Andreas, I couldn't agree more. I think early in the COVID pandemic, one of the challenges that we had is that many people had in their minds a mental model which was a flu pandemic. And it took a long time for the mental model to shift. We've seen the same thing again, that it's taking a long time for people to catch up with long COVID. and for the mental model around that to shift. So I think certainly there are things that we can do very specifically to prepare for future pandemics, but the danger is in being too specific in the preparations. The real need is to build the resilient healthcare systems with, by the way, in reference to Larry's previous question, the multidisciplinary team, which we know so well at a clinical level, being crucial at every level, really, as we prepare for all eventualities.
Well, I'd like to thank our wonderful panelists today. I hope everyone found it as informative as I did. And thank you in the audience for joining us live and also virtually. And with that, we are going to conclude our session. And I'm sure that you can give personal emails for any questions so you can overflow your inbox. So thank you, everyone.